Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van. This is a podcast about starting over. It is about what it takes to leave the familiar behind and the courage it takes to begin again in a land that isn't yet home. Together with my co-host Ben Liebenberg, we explore the untold stories of migration. Not just where people went, but why they left, what they held on to, and what they've had to let go. Each episode, we sit down with someone who's made that leap. Someone who's left behind not just places, but languages, careers, communities, and sometimes even parts of themselves. They share what called them forward, what nearly held them back, and what they've come to understand about identity, belonging, and starting again. Produced in partnership with Southern Crossings, a community for South Africans forging new lives in Australia, this podcast is a place to feel seen, heard, and understood. Because this isn't just about visas or paperwork. It's about identity, loss, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life piece by piece. So wherever you are on your journey, arriving, settling, or still thinking about it, welcome. This is where stories connect us all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This information to customers travelling on the Land Airways flight LA 800 approach Qantas 321 service to Auckland and Santiago.
Well, hello Ben, how are you doing?
Hello, Anton. Very well itself.
I'm great. The thing that is just the most amazing is that this is episode 18 of A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. Can you imagine that?
No, not really. To be quite honest, I thought if we get to 3, that'll be a major achievement. So
Yeah.
we've exceeded that well and truly. So well done.
Yeah, when I did the research in the beginning, you and I talked about podcasts, then the global kind of benchmark is if you can get past 10 episodes in a podcast, then you're like in the top 10% of podcasts in the world, because people, it's very hard to do that. And so we're very happy with that. But, Ben, this is episode 18, and this is our second last episode of 2025. Because there is a last episode coming out around about Christmas time, where Ben and I will kind of recap the year, our end of year edition, and so we are working on that at the moment. But prior to that, on episode 18, we are incredibly happy to introduce our guest today. We've been after Margaret Dreyer for a while now. And the reason why we're after her for a while is not because she didn't want to, it's just because, to get the diaries fixed and the travel fixed and all of that sort of thing. And Margaret is a pretty busy person. And so we're really, really happy to have Margaret on our podcast today, on our episode. So Margaret Dreyer, or I think for this purpose, she said, please call me MD. We'll do that. MD to everyone, born and bred in Pinetown, just outside Durban, studied at Tuks, and is now based in Mosman in Sydney. She came to Australia for several reasons, including a frightening client accident or incident in South Africa, and to secure a safer future for her children. What she carried with her is a love of entertaining and generosity, which still shapes how she leads and lives. MD found her feet with the help of a mentor, also South African. Love to hear more about that later, Margaret, whose belief in her made the difference. A trailblazer and a leader, she was South Africa's first female audit partner, later became Deloitte Australia's first female board member, served 20 years as a talent partner and on the ANA executive, spent 12 years on Deloitte's Australian board and is part of the Asia Pacific Inclusion Leaders. Her recognition include AFR Top 100 Women in Business in the inaugural year and the Saika Ubuntu Award last year. when I ask her what she don't want to speak about, she says she can speak about anything, any relevant topic, especially things about immigration tips, human rights-driven inclusion work, and the power of networks and mentors. At home, she's married to Johan with 2 married adult children and 3 grandchildren. I know what that feels like. I've got 1. So, Margaret, welcome. We're really, really, really stoked to have you here.
Thanks, Anton and Ben. It's an absolute privilege to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, we're gonna take. I wanted to introduce you now, and I mean it was quite amazing to read your bio. So we're gonna go through some of that. But first, Ben and Margaret, I want to talk a little bit about a suitcase moment, and so we're introducing in this particular podcast, we're giving it a bit of a name. We've done some work on that before. So let's call it our suitcase moment. And we will endeavor to try and in every episode get a little bit of a tidbit or a history piece or something like that. You might remember in some of our previous episodes, we talked about Caroline Chisholm. She was also a trailblazer that came in the 1840s to Australia and what she did for immigration. And then I had the story a while back where I talked about Jane Naidu, which was my own little personal story that I created about immigration, which was also a little suitcase moment. And then you might remember very recently we had the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme and the South Africans that came in the 1940s to Australia to work on that power station. And for this one, our suitcase moment for today comes from the Dutch Australian Cultural Centre. Their archive piece is the migration of Boers to Australia after the Second Anglo-Boer War. Now, this is kind of very interesting. They published the article not that long ago, and it's a community history that explains why some of the Boer families left South Africa after the 1899-1902 Second Boer War and where they settled here in Queensland and Western Australia, bringing farming know-how to places that needed it. The article is openly collaborative, and what that really means, it's almost like a Wikipedia because they're inviting people to participate in that article as well. But that what it says that after the Boer defeat and the scorched earth tactics and camps left farms and futures broken, some of the Boers refused to return to life under British rule at the time, and others chased agricultural and mining opportunities in Australia. So they actually, some of them came here. A few former prisoners of war chose not to go back. The DACC, which is the ones who wrote the article, notes that clusters in Queensland, rural districts and Western Australia farming and mining regions where the Boers' skills translated quickly into work on the land. Some of the names that are mentioned there is Hercules Milan, a veteran who migrated to Australia after the war, relatives apparently of President Paul Kruger, family members who came to Australia while Kruger himself went to exile, Cyril Philip Tron, an ex-POW who settled in Katanning in Western Australia, and the Scholes family to Queensland, the Botha family to rural Queensland and Western Australia. So these are the names that are mentioned, and each name is a thread. Families and veterans carry this heritage into the 1900s Australian rural life. So, in those podcasts, when we talk about people immigrating to Australia, South Africans particularly, it isn't just modern skilled migration. There's an older line that runs from war-torn farms in Queensland cane or Western Australia wheat and country towns that absorb new neighbours and old skills. And the last little bit of interesting things is I believe that this when Australia participated in the war, in the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa, was probably the first war that they participated outside the borders of Australia. So it's also featured on the Remembrance Day in Anzac Day. But so there's a little bit of history, Margaret. So while we talk about all the modern things, you see, so there's plenty of people that came, and those are probably some of the first people from South Africa that migrated here. So if you listen to that, how does that, how does that sound to you? And
It's
what are you
absolutely
thinking about?
fascinating. And I do have family that, that my husband's family who immigrated from Zimbabwe. Some actually came to Australia and
Yeah.
some went to South Africa. That's how I met my husband in South Africa. But, I always thought we were the trailblazers. And just listening to what you've said there, it makes sense though, because, mining and farming is what we great at in South Africa. So it makes a lot of sense. Very interesting.
Yeah, and it does, and it is. I thought that the first sort of bunch of migrations came in the 1940s, but here's a whole story before that, and I'm sure there's much deeper things there too. But so, Ben, let me bring you into the conversation. You usually, as for those who listen to the podcast know, Anton, me, I'm more kind of focusing often on the human condition. So I'll focus a lot about that. Ben starts at a very different place, right, Ben?
Yeah, I suppose for me it's always interesting to find out where people come from, how they grew up, what their background is, because I think to an extent that defines a lot of what we are today, and and in itself tells a story and learnings and where we come from. So Margaret, as per normal, we'd like to know a little bit more about yourself. Anton said you were there from Natal and then to Tux, but let's start right at the early beginnings. Where were you born, and a bit about your family, your siblings, where you grew up and went to primary school and then to high school.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, well, born in Pinetown, as Anton referred to, the eldest of 4 girls. My dad was always outnumbered, he said. Often when we got pets, they had to be male. Working class family, very privileged actually, and something that you only value after the actual event is we had one street, or my grandparents had one street, and then they subdivided the properties, and for their 8 children, each got a property. So I grew up for the first 15 years of my life living alongside my cousins and family, which was just awesome. In those old days, you had the fence running vertically from the road to the road, and in between you had a gate. So we never went into the road much, but we were playing together. It was just such a great childhood, and something that I really only valued once I left. Similar to immigrating, leaving your family is probably the hardest thing you can do. It was so great. We had Christmas together, New Year's together, and those memories are still very fond in my brain. It's like, I wish I could do that here, have my whole family here and celebrate Christmas, New Year's, whatever it is, as a family. Went to Afrikaans school in Pinetown, and then in high school.
There probably weren't many of those, right? There were probably not many Afrikaans schools in Pinetown.
No, there were actually the school I went to. It started in a grade 1 or class 1. It started when the year before I joined. So the school grew from the first 3 years, every year, a following year, as I grew in school. So it only had a full 12 years of school when I was in year 11 or standard 9. So it was a nice South African Afrikaans school, all the great sports. It's where I suppose all of us grew our love for rugby. It was as mandatory as others. Saturday afternoon, you had to go to the rugby in your school uniform. Rain, wet, you had to be there. And you just learn to love sports and community and just celebrating all the great things we do. Then when I finished school, decided I want to become a teacher because I loved sport. My whole life I've been someone that just loves playing sport. But when I got to Tux, they denied the application because I suffer from asthma. said, asthmatics at that time of, talking 45 years ago, we're not allowed to study to become PT teachers. So I had a bursary from Department of Education in Natal. So they said, well, you've got to study something else. The only other thing I had at school that I did well at was accountancy. So okay, I'm doing a BCom, and that's how I got into studying my BCom and then becoming a chartered accountant. Originally, I wanted to go to Durban Uni, but it was a little bit too liberal for my dad. It was difficult for them to accept that I would go to Durban University at that point. A good decision in the end, because I think it took. So I actually had one of the Deloitte partners as a lecturer, and they offered me a bursary. So that's how I got into Deloitte, and all just nothing planned. I didn't know what a chartered accountant was even, but joined Deloitte, and the rest is history.
So you've been a one career.
Yep.
One. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not some.
Absolutely great.
That's true. That's true, Ben. And that today's thoughts, the young ones don't stay with. Well, not that it's a loyalty issue, but they like to explore other opportunities. But I loved my time at Deloitte. It's just been awesome. And Deloitte also opened the door for us to immigrate. So I came over from Deloitte South Africa to Adelaide. Opportunities with multinationals, and it was actually such a stress-free move. They sponsored my PR, paid for the move. It was just so easy for us.
But let's go. I want to go back a little bit to this family, because part of this podcast, as is there's a middle part, which is the suitcase. And you kind of say this already, you wish you had some of this larger family here. So that must have been, when you grew up and had a whole, how many, around the Christmas table, how many people were there from the family?
80, 100.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's as they say, is a yellow large school.
That's
a lot of people. Yeah,
well, there are eight siblings, and we were 4 kids, and that was, but for one family, the smallest family. The most were 5 or 6 children. So, it was a big family. And then obviously the aunts and uncles and... Sorry, go ahead, Anton.
No, I'm listening.
I was just like my grandparents, their sisters and spouses and their families were all part of the same celebration, which is as I said earlier.
And was that all? Was that all in Pinetown? In that area, is that where you got together? Is that where your grandparents were as well? Yeah,
that's where my dad was born.
Okay.
And it was like my dad is similar to me, loves entertaining. So he was really the instigator of much of the things. So in those days, there wasn't TV, and the best thing you got to movie was driving. But we had one of these old, those cameras that you rented a movie and then you played it. And then you played the movie. So every Friday night we had steak, egg and chips, and we watched the movie Tarzan or whatever. So it was awesome.
Yeah. I remember growing up going to the earliest memory I have of growing up going to the drive-in, and I as I mentioned before in some of the episodes, I grew up in Randburg, in near Johannesburg, and there was a drive-in called the Veldskoen. And we went to the drive-in. My earliest memory was watching a movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It's that car that flew.
Yeah.
And so that's my earliest memory, and it was always the most incredible fun thing to go to the drive-in, right?
It was awesome. And we used to take Kentucky Fried Chicken. That was our treat. Kentucky
Yes,
Fried
that's
Chicken.
right.
Yeah.
We all grew up the same, Margaret.
Yes, true.
'Cause
Yeah.
Takeaways was not a big thing, right? And so it was very few and far between. And if there was a takeaway, it was either Chinese, which was the one thing, and then the other thing was Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's quite correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good days.
So this is something that, I mean, when you came to, and we're jumping around a little bit, Ben, I'm sure we'll go around again, but when you came to Australia, you left most of your family back in South Africa, obviously.
Yeah. Well, all of them. A few family members came after, including one of my sisters.
Yeah.
But still, there, of the immediate family, there are very few of us reside in Australia.
Yeah.
So did you guys go back a lot in the beginning? Did you reach out a lot or a lot of visits? How did you manage that transition?
Ben, we did. The first thing I did is to get my parents to come over, because they need to see how we live, and it's actually quite normal and similar to South Africa and safe and all those things. But we did go back as a family a few times. I was very privileged because I did a lot of recruitment for Deloitte in South Africa. So for the first 20 maybe years of my time in Australia, I would probably have gone back maybe once a year, maybe once every second year to go and recruit South Africans. So I saw my parents a lot. But the family, probably once every 3 or 4 years, we would go back to South Africa, which was, visits to the game reserve using the Australian dollar. It's just awesome. And, for your kids to see animals in the wild is just such a privilege.
Yeah, you must have come across when it was probably 4 or 5 or 6 rand to the dollar, and you saw that going worse over time to 12 or 11 now, right?
Yeah. No, we came at just over three something to the dollar.
Wow.
Which was, we didn't go with a lot of money, but now it's 12, I think.
Yeah. So that must have, and I think you say that you came across in terms of the visa process, the settling in process, and when you come across with a company like that. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to do that as an expat for Ford that I worked for, whether it was Thailand or China or UAE and so on, and I know how easy that is because everything is paid for. The road to that is easy, but what doesn't change for anybody, doesn't matter how you get in here, is settling in. Was this your first overseas trip that you did or stayed in any other country for any period of time?
No, I did have a previous experience, not permanent and not long. So I did have a bit of exposure, but a lot of naivety in expecting to see the same. As we all they barbecue or braai, but they don't really braai like we do, and their sausage is not nice. But
No.
I was naive in thinking they play rugby, but they do, but it's not really the main rugby game that's played in Australia, as you know.
Yeah.
So we came with a lot of naivety, but very, very fortunate. And I feel really for people who come here, have to struggle to get a visa, no job. It's a tough gig.
Yeah. But Margaret, we always talk about the opportunity coming here, but we're just reflecting back. You've obviously come from a tight-knit family, a big family. When you said to them, look, we're packing up, we're going over to Australia, how did they, because I know, I came over probably around that time because I'm just listening to the exchange rate, and that's around when I came over as well. And at that days, I remember now you just bumped into South Africans everywhere, but it was actually not that many South Africans over here. And it was a little bit of a stigma sometimes in South Africa if you do leave. So, how did your extended family feel when you told them, "Listen, we're packing up and we're going to Australia"? How was that received, and how did they feel about it?
But actually, my immediate family were pleased for us. They knew the reasons that we were leaving, and understood, that it was necessary. Our friends not that good. We got a lot of commentary and feedback. Funnily enough, most of them now live out of the country. And it's understandable. I mean, I probably 6 months before we decided to immigrate, I had full intent to stay in South Africa for life. There were just some episodes that happened that just, made it important for us to leave. Hence we
Is
did
this
it.
something you want to talk about?
I'm happy to share, Anton. I won't mention names, but
Yeah.
you want to hear?
No, it's always it's interesting. It's not from a gory, detailed point of view. I think it is what we do share in these stories and what we hear people. There's always different reasons why people come, and they experience certain things, and other people go for other reasons. If that was something that was fundamental in your decision-making process, then it's probably a good thing to talk about that here.
Yeah.
So the mentor I referred to earlier, he and I were doing an audit of a company in South Africa, which was partly black owned and partly owned by an Indian company. And we'd qualified the audit opinion, and we had gone to the audit committee meeting in a hall in just between Joburg and Pretoria. And it was just, we were the only two white people. And we were faced with security guards with AK-47s, keeping the directors safe. Geez, it was scary. It was just scary. And I remember walking back to our car. We had a Mercedes-Benz, one of those old ones, sitting outside. And I just said to him, "I'm going." And he said, "Me too." It was just something that we found really hard to face, very scary. And all the thoughts of going or immigrating that you get, and then you dismiss it. Prior to that, just we just made up our decision, made up our mind that we're going to immigrate together, which is tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you approach Deloitte and ask them if there's opportunity over in Australia, or how did you manage to get transferred within the company?
Pretty much, Ben. I mean, in those days, which is 98, there were very few Deloitte South Africans in Australia. In fact, when we did immigrate, we had to earn our stripes. So I had to immigrate to Adelaide, and my partner immigrated to Brisbane.
Okay.
But yeah, you do it through Deloitte. It's actually in the interest of keeping talent within the bigger Deloitte family. It's actually something that they're pretty good at.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned at some point, and I wanted to ask it then, but it didn't make any sense then. But you mentioned that you went back to South Africa many times to go and recruit South Africans to come across for Deloitte. How many South Africans did you bring across?
Probably somewhere close to 8,000 over the last 30 years.
Are you serious? Amazing.
Not all
that's
Deloitte,
an
obviously.
enormous stat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not necessarily all CAs, because my attitude towards this is if South Africans want to immigrate, obviously I'm not going to lure them here, but if they want to immigrate, then I enjoy the privilege of supporting them and giving them the opportunity to find their home in Australia. Because we would with the knowledge of the South African firm, we would have gone back to to recruit any South African chartered accountant, because it's an awesome degree, awesome training. The South African CAs are just fantastic. And we needed talent in the firm. So we would normally go to a hotel where we'd function as a cocktail and then do interviews in one of the hotel boardrooms.
Why was the degrees awesome? I mean, maybe that's an ignorant question, but it's probably a very interesting one to answer.
The South African CA is really of a very high standard. And if you couple that with the training you get at the various audit firms, the quality of chartered accountants or auditors generated by South Africa as a country have always been of a very high standard, and it remains today still. Really well trained individuals.
So that's interesting, because we often debated about that. So the standards, academic standards, from your point of view, Margaret, and you would see it translating into the workplace. So those standards is kept very high throughout the years, and you're still comfortable that, the South African Institute still deliver a really high standard of education?
Yeah, definitely. Ben, there's a few issues now with what we call COVID grads, just because they haven't had exposure to clients. They need to learn those skills. But still many Deloitte South Africans that work now for Deloitte Australia, or we've got exec members that are Deloitte South Africans. Okay. So very good quality.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So maybe then the next question is that if you obviously you were helping to bring quite a few people that wanted to immigrate across. If you then talk on behalf of all of those, what did you see? Which were the ones that really were successful, and which were the ones that struggled in terms of coming across what they did and didn't do? Because you must have. I mean, it's impossible for everybody to come across and be happy, right? So there must have been some that have gone back and some didn't work out. And no matter how much you pay them, PR status they get or anything like that, people are people, right? And so there's other things that cause them to be not happy. What did you see?
So Anton, I might answer this. We in the past and still today make a huge effort to help them to feel alone at home. Sorry. So I have South African barbecues, as I call them, or SAFA barbecues, as the Aussies call them. 3 or 4 times a year, we all get together at Lane Cove National Park. All South African Deloitte people, present and past, are invited. They bring their families along. I buy loads of boerewors from Cook Sisters, Melktert, etc. And we have a function together. Usually around Christmas, and then we have Santa coming and the little kids get gifts, and Easter, there's Easter egg hunts. So we make a huge effort to help people to settle in and feel at home. And some of those young kids call me Granny MD, my adopted grandchildren. So we, from our Deloitte perspective or from our personal perspective, made a huge effort to help them integrate. Those that were most successful were the ones that actually were somewhat humble, and curious, hungry to learn, and understand that things are different. Auditing terms are different. Business is different, and understanding and accepting that you need to adopt or adjust. Are the ones that were mostly the successful ones. And obviously, you have to work hard and all that stuff, but that's the attitude, I think, that made the difference.
So, Margaret, for you personally, how did you experience? I mean, how did you experience the transition and settling in? You talk about the differences. Did you experience this very much different, or What was it like for you?
There are differences, and I was, as I said earlier, quite naive. But the benefit I had was at the Adelaide office. It's not a big office. It's actually many benefits of going to Adelaide because the rand is worth much more there than it is in Sydney. But the office made a huge effort to to welcome us.
That's great.
Our first Christmas we spent with the office managing partner and his family, and everyone just made us feel at home, which made the transition easy. I mean, you miss family. That was really tough. But they made effort to correct me. They use the word robot, and they'd say, no, it's a traffic light, or circle is a roundabout. Those sort of things. And they still give me a hard time about some of our sayings, like now. They love using now, or just now. But the office made an effort, and and as you get to know people, because the kids were then in daycare and started to go to school, you meet parents, you go to church, you meet parents, or others, and that just, you grow your family. But the effort is yours, and it's your job. Sorry, not your job, but it was my. I felt that it was important that we as a family build a network and a family, which is what we did do in Adelaide, and it made it so much easier to integrate and feel a sense of belonging.
And the kids, how old were your kids? And I mean, generally the kids are so resilient, but it's not always the case. So how did they travel?
Oh, their biggest challenge was English, because they could only speak Afrikaans, and my daughter
Oh, really?
she
Wow,
said
that's interesting.
she refused to speak English, but it was a week later. And now when you hear them, they sound like Aussies because they couldn't speak English, so that they've got the Aussie accent. And they actually, yes, resilient, just slotted in. The hardest thing for them, as with me, was missing the family. But yeah, it was relatively easy for them.
And what I'm also hearing you saying is that there's certain traditions that you've kept. So you've lost the kind of big gathering in December or whatever with your family, but then you say, well, I have a broader family. I think you'd probably call them the Deloitte family, and so I've got a broader family. So that tradition that I used to have, I'm now building a new tradition here, but I'm doing it my way, in a South African way that I would want to do it, because then I'll have a braai and I'll have the way that we do Easter egg hunt and all that sort of stuff. That's not necessarily specifically Australian. It's very much how you grew up, and then you said, well, because I'm part of this Deloitte family, I might as well create the family here. Is that? Am I reading it right?
That is exactly, Anton. When you have to, tradition is important, and I had to create my own family, albeit they're all adopted. It was, it was a way for me to remember the things that were really important in my life, and to help others to celebrate in the joy that I found through those events. It was good.
Yeah, that's amazing. And also, I think that on the subject of what is important to you, because when we read your bio, there were a couple of things that you were kind of really stand out in terms of. I think you are very strong in things like diversity, inclusion, and that sort of thing. Where does that explain a little bit about that, but where does it come from? Because it must have some kind of history of why you're passionate about that, because you've really excelled in those particular areas, and then also in Deloitte. But Deloitte is such a global or a big company. Where does that come from?
Anton, I think it probably originates from my strong sense of human rights. That people have the right to a job, schooling, etc. And I've had that since I can remember. And probably somewhat somewhat as a result of the circumstances back in South Africa in those days. But also just, the right to go to school and uni, because my parents didn't have that opportunity. They both just trades workers. And, I did have that opportunity and started realizing how important human rights are. And that's my strongest reason for doing what I do in the diversity space, is allowing people, making sure people have the human rights that they deserve. And the diversity change. It was a bit different because when I immigrated to Adelaide, as I said, I was so surprised. There were no women in business. There were no women in Deloitte. At senior levels, that is. And I was trying to build a network, and the easiest way to do that is through women's events, because you can connect with women. You've got something in common. But I couldn't find senior women in Adelaide. I also had this absolute hunger to actually do something in Deloitte, to establish some sort of profile as someone who brings more than just an auditor to the firm. So I then connected with the one of the other leaders and said, how about we try and do something around securing and retaining our women? Because we recruit them. I mean, it's not that we don't recruit them and don't train them and invest in them. They just don't stay. So we started in 2002 with what we call the Women's Initiative in Deloitte, and it was absolutely focused on attracting, advancing, and retaining talented women in the firm.
Yeah. And it's, and what does it look like today? So, I mean, you were very much responsible for changes in Deloitte. There's no question about that. It's what your legacy is, if I can put it that way. But what does it look like now? I mean, are you bumping into many more women at senior level, or is it what does it look like today?
Oh, huge. When I immigrated, there were 5 female partners in Deloitte Australia, and we're now at 400.
Wow.
So and definitely, I mean, our CEO is a female. So it's the efforts have paid the dividends, and to go back to my human rights, we're now giving women the right to have a family and continue a career at Deloitte, which I think we all should have the right to have, to combine parenting and a career.
Yes. So, what is the difference then? I don't know. This question just pops up in my head. The difference between what's happening in Australia because you must have still very close links to Deloitte in South Africa. So, what is the difference and similarities at the moment in that space, diversity, inclusion, and that sort of thing?
I don't think it's much difference, Anton. I sit on the Global Diversity Council, and alongside me is is the South African or the African diversity leader. And when we chat about, whether it's the LGBT community, whether it's people that are disabled or neurodiverse or women, we all have the same challenges, and we all have the same success stories. So pretty much don't think there's a difference. Maybe the focus is different, but the importance remains.
Yeah. Was it the journey always? Was it the easy journey to embark on that, or was it tough in the beginning? You're talking about, only 5 women in the beginning, so obviously that would have been something new to people, and we know what people are like with change and new things. So today it's, I suppose, pretty much accepted and not so much frowned on. But was it always easy, or did you find it difficult to break through?
It was tough, Ben. It was
Was
very
it?
tough. Yeah.
Mm.
And if we still face some of those challenges today. You know, the acceptance that there is a focus on women and why. Often men say, "Well, what about us? Why don't we get special treatment?" Women don't want to be advanced unless it's a meritocracy. Don't want to feel treated specially or special. And what made the difference, I think, is we had a leadership that just stood the course and continued the journey. What made it much easier for my partners and others to understand the business case, which is actually makes so much sense, but it took time to convince people that it's important to retain your talent and that men and women are equally talented. You're not less talented because you're a woman. We put in some really good programs, which was to identify the talent around the country, because there I was sitting in Adelaide, I didn't know of good talent in Sydney or Brisbane, female talent. But we also use those opportunities to showcase talent to some of our leaders. And when they started realizing, geez, we got great women in this firm, we got more and more buy-in and more support.
Yeah, but it's a long journey, and sometimes in my roles that I had in Ford, in human resources and so on, then of course diversity, employment equity in South Africa particularly, and all those things are sometimes a very a difficult thing to do, but I think that sometimes it gets too much, and then you have to go back again and just try again. And now I take my hat off to you. I mean, it is to do this for so long. But I think what I like most about what I hear is it's not just a lot of talk. There's some substantial numbers behind this. And that, I think, is and I remember in where diversity and equity and employment equity and all those things, it always was the issue is that if you have, and I've heard this before, Margaret, and I mean you probably will agree with me. So a board of directors consists of like 9 people generally, right? So a board of directors. So if there's one woman on a board of directors, then her her voice it's just it's not really heard, even if nobody actually focus on not doing that, but a voice is not really heard. If there are 2 women on a board of directors, then they're starting to have a bit of an opinion, but that's still not nothing. But when they have 3 or 4 women on a board, it becomes something completely different. And I think that was always the thing. If you could have, let's call it scale, then that what makes the difference, because then decision making gets different, isn't it?
Yeah, very true. And we call it the tipping point, Anton. And generally speaking, it's around 20%. It really it differs. If we look at Asia, it's probably a little bit more, just because of the culture. But generally, it's 20% tipping point, which is aligns to what you've just said.
Yeah. So what have you brought with you from Pinetown, not physically, as a South African woman, female, coming to Australia? What have you brought with you that you say, well, these are the 2 or 3 things that have helped me being successful? What have you brought with in your own, the way that you are and how you grew up?
Anton, I think gratitude. Grateful for what you have and the opportunities you're given. I think we are grateful enough for the small things and the big things. Then an absolute probably an attitude of caring for other people. Whether that's from a human rights perspective or just from a perspective of helping them to have a sense of belonging and value. Which is something that my dad taught me. And then probably, the the importance of being generous, whether it's with your time or with your financial means or just with the advice you give people. Because you don't always, well, you never do it for payback, but you so often get more in return. And these were, values that I was brought up by and values that I still believe in and try to live by even today.
Yeah, Margaret, when we started this pod, Anton and I, we always said, if we can help one person to make their transition a bit easier, then our pod's been worth it, and that's why we really started, because we both said, gee, it would have been so good to have some of these lessons when we came over, and just a few tips and a few pointers. So just looking at it from that point of view, what are also the tougher things that you've learned by coming over, and what are the obstacles that you faced and that you had to overcome?
Probably one of the big things I realized quite early is the value of networks. Because it's not necessarily, as the saying goes, is what you know, it's who you know. And it's my networks have stood me in good stead in all my time in Australia. And I cherish them and I work them. So I use them to the extent that I can. One of the hardest lessons I've learned, and it's one that I wish I had thought about this earlier, is the importance of retirement. When you get here, you spend all your money. Now, when you get to my age, where retirement is imminent, you realize how important it is to provide for your old day. And I don't have family to fall upon. It's me and my husband and kids. So it was a hard lesson to learn, a number of years back, but it's one that I encourage every immigrant to work on from day one.
Yeah, I think it's important, and of course, and it's not always possible for people, right? In the sense, depending on when they come and whatever else. But you're quite right. I think that coming to Australia, everything, whilst you compare that to South Africa, there are certain things in South Africa that comes easier than here, and other things that comes more difficult here. But I think that's important. So what other things would you say? So let's say you land a new CA here again tomorrow. They probably, I don't know, all the CAs nowadays, that is good enough to come here, maybe 28 or 30 or something like that. What were the sort of 2 or 3 things you tell them to do? And what are the things you tell them not to do? Well, a mentor, right? And that's what mentors do. They tell people what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Look, I always encourage them to have a go at it. But to have a go means you have to be here for at least 2 years. Because normally in the first 2 years is when you do doubt the decision. And going home is in many cases easy, and your mother's there, your father's there, or family's there. But you have to give Australia a go. And it takes time to really find your feet in a new country. I encourage them to build a network outside of South Africans. I really think it's important that for you to learn the culture and become more culturally aligned. It's important that you learn from others, and that's not going to come from a bunch of South Africans. It's good to have South Africans as friends, and I've got multiple South African friends, but you do need to learn from Australians to be a cultural fit. and then just enjoy it. It's just like such an adventure coming to a new country. It's like, it's something that you must enjoy every minute. And it's tough to enjoy, but now I've got some young people that work for me that are financially, and they're doing it tough, but they enjoy every weekend, whether it's going to the beach or walking in the Blue Mountains or just enjoying this beautiful country. So, if you can make yourself happy, if you can be humble enough to understand you need to learn more about the culture and the ways of working. And if you give it a good go, you can and you will be successful. What I tell them not to do, I think that what I see most with South African immigrants that come here is that they do go home, and they should in the first 2 years. But so many then want to go back when they come here. They're like, I've had so many discussions with South Africans that say, like, I'm going back because, it's usually for the family awesome because you aren't working. So you're close to your kids, and you're spending time together. And that's what happened to us. When we went back the first time, we spent the holiday with our kids, which is something that they didn't have in all the time we were here. And my son didn't want to come home. Like he got into the boot of the car and said, I'm staying right here. And that's a really big challenge because you go back, you have an awesome time with your family, all the stuff that is really important. You get back here and then, that urge to go back is so big, that, many do, but many haven't. And so many that I've helped make a decision have thanked me years after, because you have to give it 2 years, as I said earlier. You have to give it a real good go.
Is that the tipping point? 2
Nah,
years.
it's just
We've
mine.
heard. We've heard. I mean, Ben, we've heard other things, right?
Yeah, I think it's individual, like Margaret said. It's just for her, but it was interesting for us. I suppose for 2 years, definitely a shift change, and then gradually, and I think within around about 7 years again, there's another. He just phases where you go into, and then it becomes just more and more easier. But yeah, no, I agree with you. And I've spoken to a lot of people. About that 2 years, I think, is the first major point. Till then, it's just unsettling, and you have to settle in. And if you can do it quicker than that, good on you. But it's not everybody that can do that. That's few and far between. So I think the point is, you need to have a bit of resilience, and also need to set your mind a bit of a longer term when you come here. Not expect everything to fall into place into 2 months. You must give yourself a bit of time, and if things don't go all your own way, it's okay. Don't stress too much about it. Give yourself a bit of time, cut yourself a bit of slack during that time.
Yeah, great, Ben.
Yeah, I agree. Ben, you're right, and Margaret, I think it's almost the word that comes to mind is one of resilience, but also courage, right? Because there's so many things that you got to get across. Whether it's your kids or whether it's your partner, your spouse, and then things don't always go right, and then things don't always work out, and it's hard, and then you often would have left a siblings or a mother or a father or something like that, and then it's hard. But I think that most people that we speak to tell that story, but then they say, look, I mean, I think the thing that they say, or many people say, and you've said it as well, is that try and join things here. So you talked about joining a church and going to church and meeting other people. Other people talk about sporting for their kids, because that's a place where you meet so many other people, and then it gives meaning to that existence. And I think if you just stick to your own group, then that doesn't work so well, because sometimes there are people in that group that are not useful, if I can put it that way, to your mindset. because that sort of thing. But I think the other thing that I wanted to just touch on quickly is that I think you also a patron at Southern Crossings, right? And probably one of the founding members, right? And so, we've got a little bit of a home there. This podcast has got a little bit of a home there, and I've met many of those people there, and there's some quality people in that network. It's a really nice network, right?
100. I mean, we have regular female lunches
Yes.
here in Sydney, and everyone there is ex-South African. I don't like the word ex-South African born.
No, we've
Yeah.
we've had a couple of people on the podcast that was banned. The word ex-South African is banned.
Yeah, no, I don't like the word either. Yeah. And many are directors or independent directors or of Australian companies. Others are like me, professional services. And how Hein and the Southern Crossings team pull these together, and the discussions we have are so beneficial, and a great way to build a network and to support others. I mean, more often than not, there would be someone that's relatively new to the country, and then they reach out, and it gives us the opportunity to help them settle in and answer some of those difficult questions, and just introduce them to others so that they can build their network. I think Hein and Southern Crossings are doing an awesome job at giving us a foundation to build networks, to get to know other people, to learn.
Yeah, I think Gail Kelly was a speaker at not too long ago.
That's right. Yeah.
We just had the Wits business lunch the other day. But the other thing that was interesting, Ben, you might remember specifically two guests. I mean, Kevin Horstman, that was one of our early guests, is that the best thing for him going to the Southern Crossings event was there was the most awesome biltong and droewors. So that was the thing that he liked. And Donovan, I remember Donovan was absolutely, Donovan Widdendal was also one of our guests, was absolutely taken aback by this very lunch and female business leader lunch that you were talking about, and he was absolutely taken aback by the quality and how successful for those ladies have been so far.
And rightly so, Anton. I mean, I've met some really, really high-performing women in all the fields. And I thought I had a really good network, but every time I go, there's someone that's just, so powerful, and someone else I can add to my network.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. What we've discovered, Ben and I, doing this podcast, is that we wanted to do something. We didn't really know how this is going to turn out. We still don't know how it's going to turn out. What we know is we're really enjoying it. It's a lot of fun, but what it does is that we get to learn so many things about people and specifically about South Africans, and specifically about so many different ideas and levels, and we get to meet so many new people, and so that's absolutely awesome. I mean, I just can't. It's wonderful, and then having somebody like you. I know we sort of get to the end of the pod or the episode now, but meeting somebody like you, and I'm thinking about what have I learned in this conversation. Then I've just learned from you is there are some simple, and it's not simple, but it's very authentic values, if I can put it that way. Being humble, know your roots, being grateful for what you have, focus on that, but then be generous to other people and generous of your time and your time here. And so I think that gives a much more fulfilled life if you can focus on generosity, you can focus on being grateful, because then if you do that, then some of the other problems are not so big, right?
100 agree.
So Ben, one or two things from you, and then I'll just want to, get us over the line here, because it's just been an awesome conversation.
Well,
Yeah, no, look, firstly, I'm sure for Margaret, it's not the first in her life that she is the first, but yeah, she's our first woman participant on the pod, and it's not with a lack of trying, Margaret. We've been trying really hard, so we really appreciate your time and coming on and learning your story. Yeah, for me, it's just another story of bravery. I mean, in hindsight, all these things sounds easy, but I'm sure it wasn't always easy. And that journey, especially, doing it for women in business and setting that up and taking that journey on, must have had its challenges. So yeah, just congratulations to you and well done. It's not easy, and building that kind of career, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
thanks, Ben. Thank you, Anton.
And just I'll close in a sec, Margaret. But Ben, just so that we don't lose listeners in the process. So Margaret's not the first one. So she's the first only Australian South
Only
African one.
Australian.
Yes. So we had Tanya Wilson a while back, but she was from America, and then we had right in the beginning a couple, Murali, and so. But yes, Ben is quite right, and that's. We work, and we will certainly, as they say in business, have an offline chat with you about how we get more diverse on here, because we really want to focus. We're focusing on that, and so that is also something that we're after. But Margaret, thank you very much. It's been an awesome conversation. Really enjoyed it. I love for what you stand for, and you were clear conviction, and you have brought across so many people that wanted to come across to Australia. Probably, I don't think we will talk to anybody ever that have done so much work in this space. And so, congratulations, firstly, but secondly, it's been a privilege to have a chat with you.
Oh, thank you, Anton and Ben, and our thanks to you guys, because I know this podcast makes a difference. So, and I know it's hard work. So, thank you for doing that. I'm sure many others will benefit from listening to your interviews and discussions. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Margaret.
You take care.